So one of you in one-on meeting with me recently asked a very simple question. Bodhicitta. We speak of cultivating it, many references to cultivating bodhicitta. It's a good translation, cultivating bodhicitta. How do you do that? How do you do that, you know? And the answer is there are multiple ways of doing it. There's no one strategy, there's no one recipe. If we had all been born in Tibet, let's say 100 years ago, 200 years ago, then their faith in the Buddha Dharma and that whole worldview, in the lamas, the institutions and so forth, was literally, it's with mother's milk. I mean, they're just getting it from the ground up. And so within that worldview, if you live in a Buddhist world, then a lot can be taken for granted and you can implement that into your practice immediately. Belief in reincarnation, karma, the 6 realms and so forth and so on. But as far as I can tell, none of us were born in that milieu, in that environment. And so I think it's, to my mind, just drawing from my own experience, in terms of a foundation for practice, any particular practice, the foundation, to my mind, when I know it works more effectively. It's very personal what I'm about to say, but it's very simple. I need to start from a place where I feel great confidence, real confidence. Not start with a leap of faith, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, and maybe I'll give it the benefit of the doubt, who knows, yeah, let's go, you know. Because then the foundation is always wobbly, in my experience. So if we just take one brief example, Shamatha. Well, you know, can we achieve Shamatha in this lifetime? Don't know. So that's not going to be the basis. Don't know. But which is better? To have a body-mind that is uptight, agitated, and alternatingly dull, or to have a body-mind that's relaxed, composed, and clear? I have no doubt. That's easy. Problem solved. And so is this worth doing? Whether we can go all the way and achieve 9 stages and achieve Shamatha, or whether we only get to 3 and we just kind of plateau out. But at least 3 is better than 1, you know. And so is that worth doing? And the answer is, to my mind, well, okay, that's the end of that conversation. And so to my mind, that was just taking one example, bodhicitta should be the same thing. For me, that's how I need to work, is not start with something that may or may not be true, and I'm not quite sure, but start where it's totally clear. And so it was a great atisha. This is a theme that the Dalai Lama has come back to so many times. As Buddha Dharma goes global, or as we like to say, goes west, you know, that it's good to tap into the Indian sources, some of which were not really highlighted in the Tibetan tradition, because they found what worked for them. And they didn't need everything in the ocean of the Buddha Dharma. They found what worked for them. And gosh, if it works, don't fix it, right? And so 1,000 years of Tibetan Buddhism, highlighting those practices they found helpful, but that means they didn't highlight certain other practices, such as the 4 applications of mindfulness. Really core, fantastic teachings. You'll hardly find any Lama who's taught that in the last 1,000 years, right? The 4 Immeasurables as distinct practices that you don't simply do the liturgy for, you're really cultivating in a very rich, nuanced, multifaceted way. I think I've seen one text in Tibetan that really unpacks them. This is an area where Theravada is really strong, marvelously strong. Mindfulness of breathing is another good example. This fantastic practice, it's so good. Tibetans didn't do much. They do it for 21 breaths and say, basta. Let's get on with the good stuff. What do we visualize now? You know? And heck, let's just visualize from the beginning. I'm breathing the breath going in and down and out and down. Oh, I like visualization. You know, if you're living at 15,000 feet, I think it's different. I really do. I think, because I've been at 15,000 feet, it's easier to visualize. You know, that's what I found. I've been up there a number of times in different continents. It's something about that. The air's thinner, it's wide open, there's not so much noise, externally or internally. And when it's quiet, it's easier to visualize. Simple truth. Okay. But now we come back to bodhicitta. Where can we start out? Where it's just like, there's no conversation, there's no discussion, yes. Right. And I'll tell you what I've come up with. Of course, I didn't come up with anything. I just kind of looked what was right there in plain sight. The 4 Immeasurables. Okay, which is better? To be hateful, mean-spirited, resentful, grumpy, or loving? Your choice. Compassion, no compassion. Empathetic joy, the hell with other people. And equanimity, I like you, but I can't stand you. You know? That's it. It's a chuckle. That's the end of the debate. There was no debate. We just kind of like, okay, any more dumb questions? And so it was Atisha. So I mentioned his name, and then I went off on my tangent. Atisha, who was utterly steeped in and embodied, I think, really the glories of Indian Buddhism at its very best. I mean, he was the par excellence. What can you say? He just embodied everything that was good about Mahayana Indian Buddhism. Everything, you know, really. And he said, when he'd spent all these 13, 14 years in Tibet and got to see how they were doing it, he said, oh, only you Tibetans know how to develop bodhicitta without developing four immeasurables. I think that was a facial expression. Because he was speaking ironically. Yeah? And so coming back there, you know. The Buddha alluded to these so many times in the Pali Canon. Of course they saturate the Mahayana tradition. But then we find find the same ones in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. There's nothing uniquely Buddhist about this. And then do you find, if not in that assortment, do you find these virtues in Christianity? Absolutely yes. All of them. All of them. You know. And then do you find them outside of the context of religion per se? Sure. Are there very, very loving people who have no religious beliefs at all? Very compassionate people. People who have tremendous capacity for empathetic joy. And very even-heartedness, just their caring for other sentient beings, maybe not only just human beings, but caring for other sentient beings just spreads out like water over an alluvial plain. Are there people like that who just have no religious beliefs at all? The answer is yeah, sure. Why not? You know. And so these are just flat-out virtues. And you know, if we could hop in a spaceship, go through a wormhole and come out to another galaxy, these will be virtues there too. I can't imagine a world system where these are not considered to be virtues. And if they're not, that's a world system that's insane. I've already diagnosed them. You know. You're crazy. If you don't think these are virtues, there's something seriously wrong with you. Brain damage, you got too close to the sun, something happened. You know. And so there it is. So that's what I'd like to do for the next few days, is go through a sequence of practices. I'm not going to go the full spread, because I've taught these quite elaborately in the past. But going one by one. So we've already done this self-directed loving kindness, and that's exactly in accordance with the Buddha's own teachings when it comes to loving kindness. One who loves himself will never harm another, he said. Yeah? And in the classic teachings, Buddha-Gosa, this synthesizing the real strategy of cultivating loving kindness in the Theravada tradition. You start with yourself. Shantideva says, if you don't reflect on the benefits of bodhicitta for yourself, how will you ever develop it for the sake of others? So we're not being temporarily selfish in directing this inwardly. We're being temporarily sane. You know, if this is good for oneself, then it'll be good for others. So without further ado, I'd like to go right into the practice. It'll be the practice of loving kindness. There are multiple approaches, but I've just selected one that I thought will at least do no harm. So please find a comfortable position. At any time, if you're really uncomfortable in the sitting position, then by all means, supine, you're always welcome. If you are comfortable for 24 minutes, it's a little bit better to be sitting, but no big deal about it, okay? Hola. So I'd like to move day by day through each of these four immeasurables in sequence. I think there's a very meaningful order to each of these four. Starting with loving kindness, so we've spent 2 afternoons on that. And I think a kind of a fundamental theme, I've never seen this actually stated explicitly in the Buddhist tradition, but it seems to me kind of obviously true. And that is, reality is comprised of 2 domains, or aspects, whatever. And one is the domain of actuality, what is already true. What is already true, it's there, it's a done deal, right? The realm of actuality. But sometimes we can get so stuck there. We can be so focused there. Remember my old mantra from William James, for the moment what we attend to is reality. Well, we can become so fixated on what is actual, what is happening, that we can really lose sight of what could be. You know? As we attend to the past, our own past of anybody, it's very easy to think, well, the future is going to be more of the same, and not see any possibility of something that is unprecedented. But if the possibility for the unprecedented were not real, there'd be no path. There'd be no point in doing anything. You may as well just hang out, because it's going to be the same old, no matter what. Yeah. So reality is comprised of that which is already true, that was actual, manifest, and then realities also consist of possibilities. And possibilities are as real as anything else. Right? I mean, they're either real or not real. And if possibilities are not real, then nothing is possible that's not already actual. Right? So I think this is not a trivial point. And I think this is just my interpretation. For what it's worth, maybe it's worth something. It is to me. And that is, there's a very good reason for starting out with loving kindness. One could start with any of the four, empathetic joy or any of them. But we know in the modern Vipassana tradition, they'll pretty much focus on metta. They may ignore the other three, but if you're going to start with one of them, if you're going to highlight one of them, well, metta is a really good place to start. There's a really good reason to continue on as well. So anybody who starts metta, finish the job. Go on to compassion. There's a reason Buddha taught 4 of these and not just one. But metta is a very good place to start. And here's my sense of it, just my interpretation. Especially nowadays in our world. I don't think I need to describe it to you. You're living here as much as I am. But if we buy into the dominant paradigm, which we see every day in the media, have you noticed there's hardly any religion in the media at all? There's virtually none. They used to have a little, like with science, technology, religion. In my lifetime, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that was there. They would cover something about, it's gone. New York Times used to cover it, no more. Time magazine, forget about it. Popular medium, BBC, it's gone. So it's all across the board secular, as if that's the only reality, as if religion is something on the fringe. Too bad. I think we're missing something there. But in this very secular world we're living in, where that's the dominant paradigm, dominating government policy, dominating media, dominating academia, and of course dominating science, it's very easy to lose sight of possibilities. And that can be very depressing, frankly. If we consider, what's happening in the world around us and what's happening in our own lives, if we don't imagine possibilities that are unprecedented. It's too bad. I just put it that way, very mildly. Too bad. And loving kindness is acknowledging the reality of the actual, what is already taking place. But the whole thrust of it, not being simply a feeling, an emotion, but an aspiration. The aspiration of loving kindness is an aspiration for what is not yet actual, but what could be. That's it, right? For oneself, for others, for the world, for all sentient beings, It's aspiring, but this means there has to be a vision. To my mind, I could just go on this topic for the whole afternoon, but for our children's children, to give them vision. Teach them how to read and develop skills and make a living and all of that. But if we're not giving each other, if we're not giving our children a vision of genuine happiness, of flourishing, then we're not giving them much. Really. I think so important. This is what loving kindness does. It can be on a superficial level, and I think sometimes it's taught on a superficial level, that one is cultivating these thoughts of loving kindness, and it's pretty much hedonia. May everybody be in good health. They're not going to be. May everybody be prosperous. They won't be. May everybody never get old. That ain't going to happen. May everybody never have a bad day. Not going to happen. So I just listed 4 things that are not going to happen. They're not possible. So why aspire for something that's not possible when there are things that are possible that are actually much more interesting, meaningful, beneficial? Eudaimonia. Can you flourish in the midst of adversity and getting sick and losing your job and being poor and dying? Those are big ones, right? Can you flourish in the midst of those? That's possible, right? That's possible. So loving kindness is visionary. That's why when I started a couple of nights ago, we started with a vision quest. Maybe a bit corny, but I don't think it's trivial. A vision quest. What is your vision? Develop a vision. Help other people, your children, have a vision. And so we move from getting almost like a Jeep that's bogged down in the mud and its tires are just spinning, and you're spinning, and you're going nowhere at all. We can get bogged down with our wheels spinning in the realm of actuality, as if that's all that's happening. That's all there is. And it's pretty bleak. It's pretty bleak. And with loving kindness, self-directed first of all, and then of course expanding like a supernova out in all directions, venturing boldly, fearlessly into the realm of possibility and envisioning what could be. Envisioning what could be. And especially in terms of eudaimonia, but not overlooking hedonia, not overlooking the possibility of everybody having enough to eat. Headline today in the news, there are now more obese people on the planet than there are people who are underweight. Yeah. 1 out of 4 men in America, 1 out of 5 women in America. And it's especially, of course, in the developed countries. Australia, Canada, blah, blah, blah. United States. Number 1, obesity, United States. And so we have 3.5 billion people living in poverty. And then our problem is obesity. Gosh, how could there be a solution? That's kind of like, duh, But we're not getting it. We're not getting it. And so there it is. As we venture into loving kindness, we lift our spirits. We become visionaries. We see the possible. And we dedicate ourselves to inviting the possible, which is really a noble possible, a noble possibility, into the realm of actuality. And then we orient our lives towards that. And that constitutes a meaningful life. That's easy. But as we venture into this realm of possibility, as we envision greater well-being, happiness, freedom from poverty, freedom from people finding genuine happiness, ourselves and others, then we may also tip over in that direction. We tend to fall into imbalances. That's an old habit. And it's possible then to really love the loving kindness practice so much, because it feels good. It comes like a little bit of a meta-narcotic. Don't bug me, I'm practicing loving kindness. Especially those irritable people. Back off. I'm creating a really nice space without you in it. This is my little happy space. This is my loving kindness space. That's easy to do. Understandable. It's easy to go, as we say in Los Angeles, into la-la land. La-la loving kindness land, where we're kind of living in this imaginary world, envisioning what could be. And as we start to lift off, lose our grounding, lose our footing, may become a little bit out of touch with this very large realm of actuality, then compassion brings us back. Because compassion starts not with a vision of possibility. It starts with very close observation of what is already real. And then we see, you don't have to be a Buddhist to see there's something to that first noble truth of suffering. Of course, there's nothing noble about it at all. It is simply a reality that is vividly seen by the noble ones, and they are Aryas. So we should never speak of a noble truth. There's nothing noble about the truth of suffering, any more than something noble about the truth of the source of suffering. Noble craving, hostility, and delusion? I don't think so. But it is, of course, these are the 4 realities, 4 Aryas, for the nobles, for those who are Aryas, that which appears strikingly real to them. But we turn to compassion then in the sequence, and we're going to get to the meditation soon. But it's returning to the realm of actual in our own lives. It's a good place to start. I'm going to keep on coming back there for all 4 of them. I'm going to come back there. I think especially in our modern world, where we have terms that didn't even exist in other languages until they're having to make them up because we've done it. You want some words that don't exist in Tibetan? Self-contempt, low self-esteem, self-loathing, lack of self-worth, self-hatred. They don't even have those words. And you have to explain them. I've told this story many times. When the Dalai Lama was first introduced to these terms, he didn't understand at all what they're referring to. And he had to have a whole discourse by Sharon Salzberg explaining what is meant and why we in the modern world maybe have to attend to these kind of things, because they can be so enormously debilitating. I've witnessed it in many people. And if that's there, just look for the catastrophe around it. It never comes with friendly bedfellows. Low self-esteem, but really nice. It pretty much doesn't. The fallout from low self-esteem, self-hatred, lack of self-worth, it's always negative. It's not compassion, it's not love, it's not virtue. It's rooted in delusion and then something of kind of a self-loathing. So in any case, because that's a reality, and it is, and now I travel a lot, it's kind of everywhere. I was kind of hoping it could be only in Europe and America, but then of course you've got to add Australia, and of course New Zealand, and then the dominoes keep falling. This turns out to be a global epidemic now. I've seen it everywhere. I travel all over the place. And so in this regard then, for each of these four, to see that we're okay at home, that there is a sense of loving kindness for ourselves within. That's your basis, and then extend outwards. There is a sense of compassion for ourselves. Don't even have that word in Tibetan, but we need it. Because we have self-loathing, therefore we need self-compassion. If you didn't have self-loathing, you wouldn't need self-compassion, right? But we do, so we do. And so self-directed compassion. Once again, it's enormously important and very simple point. In this Buddhist understanding, compassion is not an emotion. And very importantly, it's not simply feeling sorry for. That's a false facsimile, or it's something is a near miss. There's the target, missed it by that much. It's not that it's bad, feeling sorry, it's empathy, it's sympathy. That's better than cold indifference. That's good. But if all we experience when we're seeking to cultivate compassion, if all we experience is simply feeling sorry for, then exactly what good is that doing anyone? Right? If you're very ill, and I see you're very ill, and I said, "Oh, Catalina, I'm so sorry you're feeling ill. That kind of ruins my day. I'm so sorry you're feeling bad." And I walk away feeling bad. She say, and I could use some medicine here. I've just fallen on my face. But could you give me if there's no follow-up, if there's no aspiration, if there's no vision, that this person, this individual doesn't need to suffer as much as he or she is now, let alone liberation and perfect enlightenment, perhaps I could alleviate a bit of suffering. It breaks down binary thinking. Binary thinking we all fall into. I can't do anything. I'm such a schmuck. I'm so debilitated. I can't do anything. It's very easy to fall into that. When has humanity ever been, I know the answer is never. Here's the question. When has humanity ever been deluged with so much negative information about what's happening on the globe? Both the misery but also the evils, the really despicable things that human beings are doing. When have we ever been so aware? Almost force-fed, like having somebody ram dog excrement down your mouth. It's just like, it's in our face every day. It's easy to be overwhelmed. And now we know the numbers. 7 billion human beings, let alone all the other creatures on the planet. It's very easy. And we get a lot of encouragement to consider how insignificant we are. There's a lot of encouragement for that. I see it coming out a lot in science. We're so insignificant. Billions and billions of galaxies, and here we are in this little mote of dust. Look how insignificant we are. Well, no, we're not. That's just one view. It's not the whole picture. And so, compassion is an aspiration. And for the aspiration to arise, may you be free, may we be free, may I be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. Again, we could spend a week on this one. It would be a week well spent. May we be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. But if you don't know what the causes of suffering are, then you don't know what you're talking about. It's an empty, vacuous aspiration. Right? Be free of suffering. Anybody knows suffering. But you can't be free of suffering if you're not free of the causes of suffering, and you can't be free of the causes of suffering unless you identify them and you see that, in fact, they could be dispelled. Right? So compassion needs vision. As much as loving kindness needs vision, compassion must have vision. Simply to be aware of the awful things happening in the world, natural calamities, and then on top of that, all the human-created calamities, and the magnitude and the depth of mental afflictions manifesting, always justified by those who perpetuate them, can be quite overwhelming. So the compassion is an aspiration, and you may as well start local. Overcoming the world's problems with all the ecological catastrophes and everything else going on that you know as well as I do. That's a tall order. But at least could we make some headway at ground zero? Could there be at least some less suffering and some less of the inner causes of suffering or each of us lives. Is there any wiggle room there? Is there any possibility of maybe a little bit less suffering today? And a little bit less of my perpetuating my own suffering today? Could I tweak that in the right direction? If so, then you can start compassion. If it's untweakable, then it's hopeless. Then there's no compassion. Then it's just, oh, I'm so sorry. Nowhere. That's got no direction, no momentum. It's got no motion to it. And so how I'd like this start this morning, this afternoon, I should say, is go right back to the practice. And as I will do for each of the four immeasurables, we're going to start at ground zero, self. And the aspiration is, may I be free, for each of us, of course, and everybody listening, wherever you are, equally applicable. May I be free of suffering and the inner causes of suffering. Even the Buddha, after his enlightenment, still encountered adverse circumstances. Somebody trying to kill him repeatedly, most people would call that adversity. And many other things, bad things happened, to him, to his family, to his sangha, and so forth. There doesn't seem to be any escape from that, and praying for it to happen probably won't work. So may as well give that one a rest. As I'm getting older, I just have no time for doing things, empty gestures, and aspiring for that which is impossible. There are too many worthwhile things to do. I'm not going to spend any time on that. That's just my priority, because I'm going to die soon, And so I'm not going to aspire for anything that I think is actually impossible. The possibility is not in the realm of reality. It ain't going to happen. So no point in that. But this one, can we start there? Can we have some vision? Could I be freer than I am now of the suffering to which I'm vulnerable? Could I be freer than I am now to the inner causes? Just start with the three poisons is a good place to start. Delusion, craving, hostility. Could I be freer now than I am? And to not only aspire for it, but to envision it. To envision it. And then when you go outwards, we know what's happening in the news. Even if you didn't read today's news, we know what's happening around about us. And we know there are individuals and communities out there who it's just frankly very hard to love. As Buddhaghosa says, if the immediate catalyst, the trigger for loving kindness is seeing the lovableness in the other, that's it. If that's the case, okay, think of maybe if you're in America, think of some political candidates. And see if you can bring them to mind and see, oh, this person's so lovable. There's some for whom that's hard, isn't it? Some for whom that's hard. It always has been, but we're kind of getting in our face these days. So that's hard. Because they're just not giving us much to work with, And we don't know them. We don't wake up with them in the morning. We don't see them when they're not before the camera. We don't see them when they're feeling vulnerable. We don't see them when they're just talking quietly with their spouse. And so we don't see that. We see them before the camera. And that is a very tiny fraction of anybody's life. And I don't care who you are. Right? But even for those we look, the people who are willing to blow themselves up to blow up other people, at a Christian gathering in Pakistan, in Brussels, and think this is somehow justified, of course, that it's a good thing. It's hard in that we know so little about these individuals to see anything lovable at all. Therefore, loving kindness in any genuine way that's not simply an act of hypocrisy can seem a bit out of reach. Not forever, but for the time being, can be a bit tough. But then think about compassion. And I mean for the most despicable acts that are being done. The slave trade, the violation of women, of children, and the list goes on and on and on. Tragically. Just below the surface. Can you arouse, in a very sincere way, may you be free of those mental afflictions? May you be free of those mental afflictions that led you to believe this is justified. This is good. This is okay. There's a reason for this, and it's good reason. Because that's delusion. For people act out of greed, raping the earth, violating the earth. It's greed. It's the second mental affliction. For those act out of hostility, hatred, contempt. It's a mental affliction. And so for the worst evildoers, let's use that word, I think it's a safe word, true word, for the worst evildoers on the planet, they tend to be human. They're not rats or cockroaches, dogs or cats. They're us. Isn't that interesting? That we, with our enormous intelligence and all of that, we're the worst evildoers on the planet. I mean, we have no competition. Crocodiles, tsetse flies, I mean, really, they're just hanging out doing their thing. But we really are over the top, in virtue and in vice. And so, this is something I think can be sincere today. When we think of the politicians on the political scene that we may find very difficult to love or anything to respect, and you just don't come up with anything, can you focus on whoever comes to mind? And I'm not saying there's just one person, there's one obvious person, but how many more, you know? And we bring these two people to mind, and we're aware of the faults they're displaying, they're afflicted by. Can we attend to them and with all sincerity look right into their eyes in our meditation with the aspiration, may you be free. May you be free. The mental afflictions they suffer from, that we hear about, that I know, you know, on the political scene, I have each one of them. That is, all of those that I see. And we can give the list, we can all come up with this very similar list. I know that I have every single one of them. Otherwise, I wouldn't know what they're talking about. I would just go, does not compute, does not compute. I wouldn't see it. I wouldn't see that which is not part of my own repertoire. Right? Can't see it. We're blind. It'd be like colorblind. But if we take these individuals there appearing on the political screen, I think I understand all of their mental afflictions. I think so. Oh, heavens to Betsy. That must be, I have all of them. They're simply displaying my mental afflictions, but they're doing it so flamboyantly, you know. And I feel, you know, this aversion because I don't like those qualities in myself. If I didn't have them, I couldn't see them. You know, I want to be free of those. I want them to be free of those, and we'll all be better off. So I think compassion, that's where we live. That can be real, even for the worst of the worst. Rather than wishing them to be simply annihilated, wishing them to be free. Because if they're merely annihilated, if they're simply brought to justice and killed, they're just going to bring their mischief into the next life. Untouched. They're going to bring those viruses, those toxins right in the next life. And they'll be continuing that damage on until they're free. So for the benefit of all future generations, let not wish that they die. And what real benefit in simply being punished? If it's not touching their mental afflictions, then it's just some pain for them and that'll be over. But for the benefit of all sentient beings, wishing that each one might be free. Free, focusing first of all on the root cause of the suffering that they are manifesting so flamboyantly in the world. But also as we practice this close application of mindfulness to feelings, to the mind in the Vipashyana, it just becomes so clear that mental afflictions afflict. Even greed, even craving, which kind of feels good when you're experiencing it, if you think you're going to get it or you've gotten it, kind of like, oh boy, I got it. Just look a bit closer. Scratch the surface and see how far you need to go down before you find anxiety. That if you haven't gotten it, you won't. And if you have got it, you'll lose it. And oh, by the way, you will. You know. And so even greed, craving, grasping, clinging, that feels on the surface quite good. Oh, I got it. Scratch the surface. It's just more dukkha. Let alone those times when we feel contempt. I've experienced contempt. I've never enjoyed it. It's like eating something bitter. It's just like it's quite awful, really, isn't it? When we experience contempt, when we experience hatred, when we experience jealousy, when we experience arrogance. It gives me a sense of altitude, but it's so precarious because, of course, nobody agrees with me. I'm better than everybody, except for nobody agrees with me in the world, you know. And if they do, they're delusional, which is not much of an ally, right? And so the mental afflictions afflict. It's not obvious, but they do. That's why they're called mental afflictions. And so when we see for ourselves, this is where the first person comes in again. See what's the impact on your own body, your own mind, your being, your way of life, insofar as your own mind is influenced, poisoned by these mental afflictions. You know, it's just suffering. So then we see other people manifesting this really unappealing or maybe even despicable behavior. Scratch the surface. And as for me, so for them. It's suffering. It's suffering. And I don't want to suffer. And really, I don't really want anybody else to suffer. I don't think you do either. I mean, where's the benefit for you if somebody else suffers? Where's the benefit for anybody? They're just suffering. More suffering. We already had so much already. So why would we want anybody to have more when there's such a massive amount already there? You know? So this is compassion. Let's just go and practice it. Let's cultivate it. Oh, Lasso. So this afternoon, you know what to expect. We'll be turning to the third of the fourth immeasurables, empathetic joy. The Tibetan is simply gawa, or in Sanskrit mudita, which simply means delight. Delight, joy. But I think it might be helpful just momentarily to take a couple of steps back. Because within this grid, this matrix of the four immeasurables and how they interrelate, and I'm thinking especially of Buddhaghosa's analysis of the near enemies, the far enemies, the proximate cause, signs of failure, signs of success, is really quite brilliant. I think it's first-rate genius. But I'm not going to go into that elaborate explanation. It would take too long for time being. But simply the manner in which each of the four immeasurables serves as a natural antibody or remedy for one of the others when it goes astray, when it falls into its false facsimile. And so I think this is very, very worth reviewing, and it might even be new to some of you, especially people listening by podcast. So let's just go back briefly to the first of the four immeasurables, loving kindness. Clearly a virtue. I think your understanding of it is clear. But then among the four immeasurables, which of these goes astray, and for which of those that go astray is loving kindness, the suitable remedy, the good friend. And it is in fact empathetic joy. When it goes astray in a way that we're all, I think, very familiar with. And that is, just call it hedonic fixation. It's just, Dharma's all very well, but I'm just so busy right now. And I'm focused on career, I'm focused on relationship, I'm focused on getting over my health issues, I'm focused on paying my bills, I'm focused on hedonia. I'm getting by, and it's tough. This is a tough world to get by in for many, many people. And Dharma just gets to be kind of a luxury item that gets postponed when times are smoother and easier, you know? And this happens, I think, probably to all of us on occasion, and for some people it doesn't happen, it is where they're living. Because there is no vision. There is no vision of eudaimonia. They don't know the word means, they don't know the corresponding term in their own language. There is no vision. And when I really think of and some of the major American media and so on, and you know, there's just basically no reference to eudaimonia at all. I mean, it's pretty much not there. It's all about hedonia. And hedonia is not something that's stupid or vulgar. It's helping people in poverty. It's about, you know, creating peace where there's war and so forth. It's not trivial. But it's just that it's so limited. It's just so limited. It's addressing all the political problems, environmental, economic, social, moral, legal, and so forth problems. And then there's no vision. There's no vision in popular media. I'm not saying there's no vision in modernity, there is. Christianity, if you know where to look, has tremendous vision, and so do other wisdom traditions. But it's not out there where you can see it, and it's not in academia. I've had a lot of academia. You know, I have a PhD. So I sought it out, of course, in religious studies. But by and large in academia, there's no vision there. Not even in religious studies, by and large, unless you really seek it out. So it's hedonia across the boards. And that's the current of humanity, but especially now. Especially now. I think perhaps more so than in recorded history that I know of. It's just visionless. You know, visionless. And the working assumption through the media, the academia, the scientific community, is when you're dead, you're dead. Game over. You know, that's it. And that's pretty much the vision that's out there and not even being questioned. As if you're not a religious believer, one of those people that's kind of soft-headed, don't think very clearly, and you're caught up in wishful thinking. If you're realistic, just face the facts. When you're dead, you're finished. Game over. And there's just no vision there. And so it's very easy to understand why people might encounter some authentic Dharma and then just fade. Blade by blade, fade out and just go right back to complete fixation, almost like self-hypnosis. And what's the antidote for that? Because there's one thing you can be sure of. Insofar as the life is completely focused on the hedonic, it ends badly. It always does. It never turns out well if it's all about hedonia. For a very simple reason, whatever you acquire, hedonia is all about acquiring. Getting reputation, getting success, getting enjoyment, getting. And of course, it always turns out losing everything you've gotten. Whether you got a little bit or you get a lot, in the end game, you lose everything, so it kind of doesn't matter what you had, because you'll lose all of it anyway. It never turns out well. And so the antidote to that is just don't think about it. So it's it's immensely sad. It's immensely sad. And yet right here in front of us, and it's not just Buddhism, there are wisdom traditions all over the world, East and West, ancient and modern, where it's there, but it's not getting covered. It doesn't get the microphone. So coming right back to loving kindness, when we do find ourselves, whether for a morning or for a year or for years on end, just going with the flow of it's all about hedonia, where there's no vision. There's just no vision except for, more of this should be good, more of the good part. More acquisition, more fame, more power, more pleasure, more entertainment, better vacations, nicer car, nicer. That's the vision. It's the vision of stupor. It's the vision of unintelligence, because the scientific evidence is so totally clear that just getting more of the same does not make one happier. It's unequivocally established as a scientific fact. And before then, for centuries and centuries, it was known by sages East and West. So we're coming back again, not to ramble too much, but loving kindness is all about vision. It's all about vision. It's not just may we all be well and happy, and may we all have lots of hedonia, because that'll never happen. So again, I'm not going to go in a direction of aspiring for something that simply can't happen. You're born, you're going to get sick, you're going to get age, you're going to get age, and then you're going to die. And whatever you acquire, you're going to lose. So that's kind of a given. Now have a nice day. In the midst of that, where is there any vision of happiness? And there is an incredibly rich vision of happiness. And I've known so many really accomplished Dharma practitioners for whom you can see this is not hypothetical. This is not some abstract belief. This is real. And I've known such people. I've known them for years. And they're embodying what I'm talking about right now. So then, if I keep my eyes open, this is perfectly clear. So, antidote for that, it's right there in loving kindness, and loving kindness is about vision. And I think there's not a bad strategy in that fourfold vision quest. When we're just focused on getting by, on success, on just the mundane, stepping back and simply asking the simple question, what would make you truly happy? What would make you truly happy? Do you really think this is going to work out? If you had this much money, or this much fame, this much success, this much acquisition, this type of a marriage, is that really going to do it for the long term? That's going to turn out well? You really think so? Get vision. And the fourfold vision question, I think, it really brings to mind the possibility of vision. So there's the first one, loving kindness. Serves as an antidote for empathetic joy, where it just focuses on the good life, hedonically. Then compassion, now briefly stated. Cultivation of compassion, the cultivation of this is an antidote, an antibody for equanimity when it falls into aloof indifference. Where one may become, especially it's easy here in the 21st century, to be so overwhelmed by the amount of information, and like by the way of the media, which I'm checking every day, and just feeling this is like a tsunami of bad news. And it's so large, and there's so many people, and there's so many forces here that are just all about delusion, greed, hostility, and so forth. And here I am. And here's one of the big themes of modern astronomy and evolutionary biology and so forth, and that is just how bloody insignificant we are. They really hammer it in. We are so insignificant, you know, as a species, as a planet. And then, oh, you're only one of 7 billion? Boy, that makes you minuscule. You're vanishingly insignificant. I can hardly see you, you know. And that's about ourselves. And so all of that can be very dispiriting and just can easily give rise to a sense of, oh, what the hell? I don't care anymore. I can't do anything about it anyway, so what the hell? And just go into cold indifference and say, not my problem. Not my problem. I'm just going to try to get by myself, have a good time. I'm going to be dead soon anyway. And it's kind of bleak, yeah? And compassion. We turn our attention right back to the world, right back to ourselves, right back to those around us. And we say, well, you can think whatever you like, but suffering is about as real as it gets. Suffering and the causes of suffering. Blink all you like, but boy, open your eyes again and that's right there. And people really are suffering. Really suffering. Perpetuating the suffering. Not because they want to, because they don't know any better, you know. And just reflect on that and still the heart just starts to move. It starts to beat again, you know. And you start to care again. So compassion moves one out of that kind of myopic, aloof, lethargic, visionless apathy of cold indifference. It really does. It really does. When we reflect upon our own suffering, times we've really, really got beaten up by physical or mental suffering, and we know how it really catches the attention. Then when we see those around us, many, many, many are experiencing that right now. If you attend, I mean, for the moment what we attend to is reality. And if we do attend to those who are really suffering, it takes a person who's really seriously damaged mentally to be able to attend closely and still not care. That's a rare individual. I think most of us, we really find, have to care. You have to care. And so then now we go to today's topic. Very rich one, and it's kind of like the easily overlooked one. Loving kindness, you can't overlook that. Everybody loves. The Beatles love love, everybody loves love, you know. And compassion, it's everywhere. We all know the word. It's a wonderful word in English. And equanimity, that is the unconditioned quality, that's unconditional love, unconditional. That gets good billing, that gets, you know, that gets highlighted. But the third one, not so much. And yet, I think is as important as all the rest, this joy, empathetic joy. And that for which it serves as the antidote. Because again, because of the times, this 21st century where we live, it really strikes me that this empathetic joy is especially important. It's always been important. But in our world, it strikes me as being especially important. Because it is the antidote when compassion goes astray. And it falls into despair. Into despair. Just grief, despair. But despair, I think, is the best word. And that is when it tends to the suffering of others, and then just when it tends and it does become real, and then it becomes so real that it's just overwhelming, and then it's right back to the same old, what can a person like me? I'm not a bodhisattva, I'm not an Arya bodhisattva, I'm not a Vidyadhara, I'm not a saint, I'm not a sage, I'm just really so ordinary. And then here's this world, and what can a person like me do? Nothing. And just fall into despair, despondency, and a loss of hope, and once again a loss of vision. And empathetic joy comes in, and that's the remedy. It's the remedy. It's very easy for any of us, certainly myself included, to think in black and white terms, like, can I achieve shamatha or not? That's yes or no, right? Yes or no. And yet when we fall into that, when kind of that notion, yes or no, is it worth, that is, it's worth doing if I can achieve it. If I can't, well then hell with it, you know, like that. But shamatha is not like that. And that is what the 9 stages are for, all right? Okay, maybe shamatha may be difficult. Maybe you can't achieve it. Maybe you'll die tomorrow. Then you probably won't achieve it. But how about stage 2? You know, you break it down, you say, well, stage 2, that's better than stage 1. That's getting a bit of continuity, you know, sanity all in a stretch. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, cool. You know. And so you break it down and you say, well, okay, I just don't know. I don't know whether I'll live long enough. I don't know whether the circumstances come together. I don't know how much inspiration and momentum and merit I have. Do I know, can I achieve shamatha in this lifetime? Don't know. I don't know. But is that a direction worth going in? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, yes, unequivocally, without any kind of doubt whatsoever. That's the direction to go to, and not just walk around in circles or go backwards. But similarly, when it comes to the larger picture, we look at the tremendous needs of the world in so many different ways. And again, this theme, because we are so unprecedentedly overwhelmed by the bad news and the travails of the modern world, it's very easy to think, well, a person like myself, namely this one, right, me, I can't really do much, I can't really do anything. I mean, it's just so overwhelming. It's like looking at a 30-foot tsunami wave coming in, and yeah, what are you going to do about that? Well, duck. You know, what can I do? Nothing. But it's a lack of vision. Once again, it's a lack of vision. And that, as you step out the door, if you see another person, can you just attend to that person with affection? That actually is very nice to do that. People like it. Have you noticed? When you attend to them with affection. Just warmth, kindness. You know, it feels nice, doesn't it? It's something good. It feels good to do it, to extend it. It's lovely to be a recipient. To show another person an act of kindness, even the smallest thing. To see another person in need in some way and to be able to fulfill that need. It's not yes or no. It's not, can I solve the world's problems or not? It's where I live, can I have a helpful influence? Can I bring some warmth, some wisdom, some kindness to the world? And maybe I could bring it to myself first, you know. So this is where empathetic joy comes in. It's the glass half full rather than half empty. And I don't mean to trivialize it, because it's not trivial at all. But this empathetic joy, again, I'm going to do something that you don't find in the Buddha Sutras, because I don't think it was such a big issue until modern time. This whole issue of low self-esteem and all that business. You don't even have those terms in Buddhism, or in Tibetan and so forth. But it is such a big deal nowadays, that even though it sounds a bit ironic, or kind of like, how do you say, it doesn't even work linguistically to speak of empathetic joy toward yourself. What does that mean? Wait a minute, you are one person, how can you feel empathy for yourself? I'll tell you how. I'll tell you exactly how you can feel empathy for yourself. In the same way you can feel contempt for yourself. How many people are there? When you feel contempt for yourself, is there one of you or two of you? I think there must be two. Because the person who's feeling contempt for you is feeling a bit higher than you. Yeah? This guy Alan Wall is such a schmuck. At least I'm not as much of a schmuck as he is. You know, there's already a bit of internal bifurcation of looking down on the person you've objectified as yourself and finding this person wanting, deficient, kind of a disappointment. But from whose perspective? Your perspective, which is a bit elevated. You know? So we already do that. We already bifurcate our very sense of identity. In narcissism, there's this congratulation that I'm such a superior person, I'm so exceptional. If only people knew how exceptional I really am. And there's this self-congratulation, like, you know, you're a cheerleader for yourself. There's a bifurcation internally. It's already there. And so we do that. But if we do this in these afflictive ways, these kind of neurotic ways, then we may as well say, okay, if we're going to do that, let's do something healthy about it. But what's interesting here, because this is not a step towards narcissism to try to overcome low self-esteem, that's, you know, just remedying one affliction with another affliction. You know, high self-esteem, low self-esteem, which is worse? Really, you know. I don't see either one of them as being helpful. Why don't you just take self out of the equation, and in our lives, as we attend to those occasions where we brought something good to the world, whether we've gone for a weekend retreat and it was meaningful, we had a good motivation, we spent it meaningfully, we dedicated merit, and it was a weekend. You look back on that, that was a good weekend. And it's not, oh, look at me, like Tarzan pounding his chest. It's kind of like, that was a good weekend, you know. Or an act of kindness here, or doing something else there. Something meaningful, something good, something making a contribution. Even if it's primarily making a contribution to purifying and refining your own mind. That's also very meaningful. So these little things, a weekend retreat, going on an 8-week retreat, going to receive teachings, giving some teachings, a number of you are teachers in your own right, and in various ways, teaching yoga, teaching language, and so forth and so on. There's a lot to take satisfaction in. And to focus on that, without even the whiff or even a fragment of narcissism, self-congratulation, me, me, me. It's not me, me, me. It's it. Taking delight in what we brought to the world and where there are things to take delight in. Yeah. And then we see, oh, actually I'm not total waste. I'm not a waste of space or of air. I've brought something good to the world. And so to reflect upon one's own successes, one's virtues, the goodness one has brought to the world, and take delight in that. Tsongkhapa says, the great Tsongkhapa says, well, among the various ways to increase your merit, to increase this kind of spiritual charge, momentum, inspiration, energy that propels you along the path, merit. The easiest way. You remember, Glenn? The easiest way to accrue merit? What's that? Actually, no, that's harder. This is easier. Rejoicing in your own merit. Rejoicing in your own, and that's the easiest way. I want easiest. Show me the easiest first, then I'll get to the more challenging things later. But I want the easiest. And just looking back on your own virtues, what the goodness, the virtues, whatever good you brought to the world, and just taking delight in that. It shouldn't be too hard. And that's the easiest way. And then, of course, then you can extend that outwards to others and say, well, let's say the Dalai Lama, has he done anything good in the world? Yeah, maybe something to take satisfaction in, to rejoice in, and so forth. And then he's not alone, happily. There are many noble people in the Buddhist tradition, in other religious traditions, outside of religious traditions, where you just look at them and say, boy, you're like a lighthouse in the middle of a very dark storm, and high seas, and there you are, just shedding your light. And there's so many people like that, through history and in the modern world right now. And they're easily overlooked because they don't get in the headlines too much. We hear about the mother who kills her children, we hear about the one more corrupt politician, we hear about another this and another that, and the most ridiculous thing that this guy who thinks he wants to be president, has said today, we hear about that. I mean, it's just like, keep the microphone next to his mouth so we can hear the next idiotic thing he says, and then make sure everybody knows about it. The fascination for this, I find, is utterly astonishing. I mean, maybe I should just start making all the incredibly stupid comments that I have, and I'll get a microphone. I have my microphone, try to use it well. But there it is, to take delight. That it's not only idiocy, not only greed and stupidity and short-sightedness and hostility and flat-out delusional meanness. There's so much good out there. And it's easily overlooked. In our world, it's easily overlooked because that's not what makes its way into the media. When you want to know the news that happened today, look on that front page and see how much good news there is. Good luck with that, And it's not that it isn't there, but apparently that doesn't sell newspapers or get you to go onto their website and so forth. They found that out. It actually doesn't sell. And that's why it's not there. I mean, they'll put anything there that sells because they're money-making businesses. They're for-profit businesses. And they're going to put on their website or on their newspaper that which will get more readers to read and then look at their advertisements or buy subscriptions and so forth. And apparently good news doesn't sell very well. I guess it's boring. But then it gives us a very skewed, a very biased, a very highly edited vision of reality that's not realistic. So we come back to the meditation. Let's do so. Let's go to empathetic joy. Let's sit down and enjoy ourselves. Hola. So it is a good afternoon. So this afternoon we'll go to the fourth of the four measurables, which from one very narrow-minded perspective could look like an anticlimax after loving kindness and compassion and equanimity. But when we look at the fourth one with insight, we see it's actually the grand finale. It's the full flowering of these four measurables, and it is the indispensable basis for venturing into the Mahayana, into bodhicitta. Without equanimity, bodhicitta never happens. Never happens. Impossible. Okay. And equanimity, of course, is not simply a feeling of neutrality, neither happy nor sad. It actually has nothing to do with that. Equanimity, this term, upeksha, in Sanskrit, has different meanings in different contexts. I'll not give a scholarly exposition of each of the meanings, but suffice it to say, here in this context of the four immeasurables, it is an even-heartedness as we attend to all different types of, let's say, people for the time being. There are people who, immediately upon encountering them, they're agreeable, let alone their physical appearances. I think it's kind of superficial. But in terms of how they present themselves, how they engage with us, how they act, the type of attitudes they express, these are much more important than mere bone structure and skin, right? And so, in this regard too, some people are very agreeable. We find it very pleasant to be with them, to engage with them. We look forward to seeing them again. And other people, perhaps on immediate contact, or even knowing about them by way of media, from a distance, we may find their behavior quite disagreeable, and that's because it is. It's not just prejudice. There's sometimes a behavior is just disgusting, And there are attitudes that are appalling. And the attitudes get expressed, and the expressions are appalling. And that's just a true statement. I mean, I could be a Buddha and saying this, it would still be true. Because Buddhas also recognize appalling behavior. The Buddha did, of course. He would not be intelligent if he didn't. And so there it is, just a flat-out fact, that some people's way of engaging with the world, presenting themselves in the world, their attitudes and others, some are very wholesome, some very unwholesome, some very agreeable, and some very disagreeable. So insofar as we attend to others as objects that either give us pleasure or catalyze a sense of pleasure or displeasure, there's just no question other people are not even. Some people are much more positive, nicer than others. But the whole point of this practice, this culmination, and that's why it truly is the culmination, the full flowering, these four immeasurables, is to look beyond the appearances, and to look from subject to subject, to almost like jump out of your own shoes and jump into the shoes, into the perspective, into the being of the other person, and imagine viewing reality from their own eyes. And in this regard, then, actually we're all the same, in the sense that whoever we are, whatever behavior we engage in, and I mean the full bandwidth, from the diabolical to the angelic, the whole bandwidth, we're all doing what we do out of a wish to be happy. And some people, when they get into gear and are acting in order to find happiness, the satisfaction and so forth they seek, some people, when they get into gear, their behavior is magnificent. And others, when they get into gear, their behavior is diabolical. It's absolutely evil. But the motivation's the same. They want to be free of suffering. They want to find happiness. So the only difference then from the let's say the diabolical to the celestial in that whole bandwidth of behavior, really the only difference is the degree to which sentient beings, we sentient beings, are subject to, dominated by mental afflictions. If people pursue their fundamental yearning to find happiness and be free of suffering, and their minds are really, let's say, utterly unencumbered, unfiltered, unobscured by mental afflictions, then they'll just be really nice to be with. And the same person, if you veil that person's mind with delusion, craving, hostility, it may be unbearable to be in their presence. But the motivation's the same. But then nobody ever chooses to have mental afflictions. Nobody ever wakes up with a pure mind and say, this is boring, let's have mental afflictions today. Never happens. Any more than a person wakes up one morning and says, I'm just tired of being healthy, I think I'd like to have terminal cancer. Just something different for a change. Nobody ever has. And so as disease alights upon or comes to an individual, unwelcome and uninvited, so do mental afflictions come up. Unwelcome and uninvited. So the first victim of a mental affliction is not those who are the recipients of this person's harmful behavior outside. The first victim, of course, is the person who is suffering from the mental afflictions. And the worst of that is if they don't even recognize the mental affliction as a mental affliction. Then they're not only mentally afflicted, but they're delusional. And I mean in the technical sense of the term. They're delusional. They are fundamentally out of touch with reality. If you don't even recognize these basic mental afflictions as mental afflictions, diseases, poisons of the mind, then this just gives rise to all the more compassion, for such a person is profoundly delusional. So when we cut to that depth, and without many more words, I'd really like to get to the meditation. But as we seek to cultivate this even-heartedness, this even-mindedness, this even sense of caring, it's a very nice verb to care. Very nice word in English, to care. It's more primal than loving kindness or compassion. Loving kindness has a positive valence. May you find happiness, the cause of happiness. We smile when we think of that. May you be free of suffering and the cause of suffering. The facial expression is a bit more somber when you see people suffering from the causes of suffering. But more primal, more root-like, more fundamental than the derivative loving kindness and loving and compassion is simply caring. And so it's that sense of caring, of wishing and then expressing itself derivatively as the wish that others may be free of suffering, find the happiness they seek. It's on that level. This equanimity is the even extension of caring. However people appear. And we are really experiencing this immeasurable equanimity when the heart is equally open and equally caring for persons whose behavior looks like it's straight from the hell realms. Just, like they just came from the hell realms and they're just doing the same thing, but here. And we've seen this happen so many times in history. It's like you're just inviting hell on earth. Who needs to give examples? We have too many, right? And they've happened on all continents. It would be nice if only one race were bad, then we could say, oh, they're the bad ones. But no, it's us. It's us. All skin colors, all ethnic groups. And so, whether it's that type of behavior, whether it's one-on-one or creating for whole communities, hell on earth, which has happened so many times, or whether those who are just creating pure lands by their sheer presence. I've experienced people like that, where you feel like you're in a pure land just by being with the person's presence, because they're creating that just by being who they are. That whole bandwidth. If one can attend to this end of the spectrum and this end of the spectrum, and the heart is equally open, in a very sincere way, may you be free of suffering and its causes. May you find happiness and its causes. Then you found immeasurable equanimity. And that's the foundation. That's the foundation for the whole Bodhisattva path. That's it. That's one of the two, when I was first taught meditation, one-on-one, just given some practical instruction, one-on-one advice. It was first from Geshe Rabten, way back, 71, it must have been 71. And he gave me just 2 meditations, and this was one of them. He had me just start right there. And he said, Alan, I'm giving you the equanimity meditation because if you look back on all of the kind of conflicts, restlessness, unhappiness, and so forth, you've experienced in your relationship with other people. It always stems from this, the lack of this. The attachment for some, the aversion for others, liking some, disliking others, etc. It stems from that, And of course he was right. And he was also right, this is not easy, but it's so important that it mustn't be skipped. So you see it in the preceding meditations when we were practicing the loving kindness, in both of those modalities that we did, we're sending out. So sending out, many of you, but not all of you, are familiar with the Indo-Tibetan Buddhist practice called Tonglen. Tonglen. Tong sending, len taking. We're sending out the light of loving kindness, the light of joy, the light of purity, light of purification. And we're doing this symbolically, of course, sending this out from our own Buddha nature, an orb of light at the heart. And then len, taking in, we imagine taking in the darkness of other suffering, the cause of the suffering, but not taking in like an ever-increasing burden that's going to break our back if it gets too heavy, but rather taking it in right into the nucleus. And here's an infinite nucleus. So even if you're taking in massive evil, this is bigger, and it can consume it, and there's no trace. So that's actually a crucial point, that you draw it in and you extinguish it. So we did the tong, the sending out, and the loving kindness practice. We did the len, the taking in, during the compassion practice. And now we'll take the 2 pieces and put them together into tong len 1 practice, and we'll incorporate that into the cultivation of equanimity. Okay? This tong len is one of the most powerful practices in all of the Indian and Tibetan Buddhism, taught magnificently by Shantideva, probably the greatest propagator of this practice in Buddhism. And we'll incorporate this now, which will be the foundation for tomorrow, then venturing into the Mahayana practices, the cultivation of great compassion and so forth. And then it will become clear to everyone here how these are different from and transcend even immeasurable loving kindness, compassion, and so forth. And then we'll be moving on the fast track to the actual explicit and direct cultivation of bodhicitta. Okay, so please find a comfortable posture. jump right in.